In cybersecurity, the biggest threats aren't always the attackers. It can sometimes be the blind spots that we create ourselves. Organizations that are attracted to the lure of shiny tools like to deploy them out of the box and then assume they are protected. But as our guests today warn, those brilliant tools might not be doing what the organization needs. There is a tendency for leaders to believe that we've bought the tool and now we're safe. But sadly, that's not always correct. So in this episode, we're going to dig into the uncomfortable truth. Real security isn't about the technology you buy, but how deeply you understand your environment, your people, and the hidden gaps that attackers exploit long before you ever see an alert. Without this, you're just flying blind. I'm Steve Prentice, and this is the Thales Security Sessions podcast. To help us understand how to avoid the conundrum of what we think we need and what we have been sold, I am joined today by Zoë Rose, who's CSIRT Manager at Canon EMEA, and Chris Harris, AVP Sales Engineering at Thales. Zoë, thank you so much for joining me here today on the Thales Security Sessions podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And Chris, the same. Thank you and welcome.
Thanks. I'm really looking forward to it.
Our goal today is to talk about clients and customers, what they think they need versus what they actually need, and how we can bring these two sides together when it comes to deployment of security tools. This requires some particular talent and finesse, which you both possess in great measure. So Zoë, before we get into the situations that you have faced as a consultant, I'd love to learn a little bit about yourself and how you got here.
My official title is the CSIRT, which is Cybersecurity Incident Response Team, Security Operations Development Manager. I manage the security operations team, so my job as a manager is supporting any escalations or incident investigation from a manager perspective. So I do more coordination nowadays than I used to, but yeah, and maturing our visibility, ensuring the tooling meets the requirements, looking at the roadmap and making sure that we're planning accordingly, which sounds boring, but actually it's kind of cool. I've worked in the security industry for 15 or so years. I started out liking technology and security because I thought it meant I got to hide in the server room. And then over my career, I learned that security is all about people. And so I had to learn about getting on with people, basically. Yeah.
And Chris, you are part of the Thales group. So how do you fit into this scenario?
I am, yeah. I'm the AVP of Sales Engineering at Thales, but I've been in cybersecurity for my whole career, so more than 30 years now, which I'm not sure if that makes me stupid or old, one of the two, maybe both.
Oh, you can be both. It's allowed.
Yeah, I kind of feel it sometimes. And you can imagine in 30 years, things have changed dramatically. You know, I began with smart cards and then kind of moved into hardware security modules and key management and identity. But fundamentally, you know, my job within Thales and my team's role is to help customers secure data, and then the tools and the information that's generated help people like Zoë make informed decisions about what an organization needs to do.
I guess the problem that you face is that when it comes to security solutions, many organizations do expect to be able to deploy them directly out of the box. And as great as those products may be, these companies must next learn a little about tuning and operational maturity so that they are not flying blind. Zoë, how did you and do you handle this?
I think the first part is when I worked in consulting. So I did majority of my career, I was a consultant, and I would go into organizations and they would have brilliant tools. They'd have the sexy tools that everybody wants, but they wouldn't be doing what the company needed. And it wasn't because the tool wasn't good, and it wasn't because the analysts weren't good. It was because the tool was bought possibly with the wrong reason, like maybe they were just a really good sales and it didn't actually solve the root cause, or it could, but it wasn't set up in a way that worked for the organization. So I think what it means to tune a tool, to actually deploy it in an intelligent manner, isn't, okay, out of box, it can do this, but we must do X, Y, Z. It's, I have all of these requirements. Does this tool meet that need? Yes, but it may be out-of-box can cover 50% of the requirements, and then you have to add some customization for the other 50%. Often, when I was called in as a security consultant or as an incident responder, it was because they deployed it, but they only had budget for the license. They didn't have the professional services, or they didn't do training. So they deployed it, and then the operations team were expected to further mature it themselves. And so they're overwhelmed with white noise, with results that are not getting to the point where they are benefiting from it. They don't see the benefits. So senior leadership is like, well, why do we keep investing if you're not getting benefits? If you keep adding to the costs, maybe you need to hire another person now to deal with all of these alerts. If you want to deploy a tool, you have to consider not just the out of box. You have to consider your requirements. Does it match your requirements? And how can you actually get there? Usually that means deploying it and customizing it based on your needs of your environment.
I guess we're looking at the shiny toy syndrome to some degree, where everything looks like a great opportunity and maybe even a turnkey solution. But as you pointed out, it's not only customization and deployment that's needed, it's also the training of the people who are expected to use it. So it's a 3-part responsibility rather than just an initial purchase. Chris, from your perspective as someone who is responsible for assisting organizations in identifying the right kinds of products, do you agree with Zoe's approach? What's your strategy for helping companies accept this 3-part concept?
I definitely agree that buying a tool because somebody else has bought a tool is not the right reason to do it. If you look at an organization that you feel is doing the right thing, looking at what tools they've got and replicating that in your environment might not lead to the same outcomes. The implementation of a tool, whether it's AI-enabled or a more traditional tool, is a starting point and not the finishing line. And we very much recognize that. As a vendor, it's our mission to try and make that period as short as possible. Certainly, the things that Zoe mentioned are really important in terms of training and professional service to make sure that the organization's getting the most out of it. Because really, that's the best thing for everybody. We want somebody to be happy with the purchasing decision they've made. We want them to feel like the tool's adding value. And if it just adds noise, or worse still, if usually from a more senior level, if people think, well, we've bought that tool, we're now safe. That's a dangerous thing to assume. Just because you've bought the market-leading, shiny tool, it doesn't mean you're well protected. It's about how you use it. It's about how you customize it. And more than anything, and again, especially with AI coming in more, it's about teaching it to understand the environment that it finds itself in, because one organization is very different to another one.
How have you seen clients respond when they discover that the purchase of a new solution might not be the single step to meet their requirements? And what's your strategy?
Yeah, so at the moment, I'm internally facing, which is odd for me. But historically, yes, I was client facing. And when I was called in, I was not a salesperson. I was the analyst and the consultant that solved the problem when there was one. So, for example, they deployed this tool, had a major incident. I would go and investigate incident and then do lessons learned and mature from there. Or maybe they bought a tool but it's not doing what they want, or they've got a project halfway but it's failing, etc., etc. Those are the situations that I would come in, and often it would be not to bash sales teams, obviously, but there were a lot of gaps between the sales presentation of what the solution could do and what the client thought it could do. And maybe it was a miscommunication in some situations. Some situations it was a overpromise, not as common, but that does happen. But in a lot of situations, it's the customer doesn't know all of the requirements they need, I suppose, or the person that's paying the bill versus the analyst that's doing the work. Maybe there's a disjoint there. And so when they go out to find the solution, there's a gap in how they understand it's going to work. And as a business, understandably, you've got a budget, you've got a limitation to what you can spend. You want the best solution for the money that you can spend, right? Often people underestimate the cost of not just the license, but the deployment of the solution and the training. If you're a smaller organization or even an enterprise, you're getting an expensive tool, you probably don't want to pay for a specific expert. So you probably want to get these professional services and then training to the point that you need it internally. But I think that professional service bit isn't always prioritized in the way it should be.
It might appear uncomfortable for a budget-conscious leadership to realize that a new technology package also comes needing tuning, training, and deployment, but such is the hard truth. So how do you take care of helping them understand and get comfortable with this reality that the upgrade will cost them more than the actual price on the box?
The glib answer is it's not about the cost, it's about the value. But, without wanting to defend salespeople and vendors, it can be really difficult, especially these days with the complexity of organizations, to fully understand in that sales cycle what that end organization looks like. And so it's very often the case that when you deploy something, when you move from, a nice sanitized demonstration or proof of concept or evaluation to the real world, you're going to hit these speed bumps, something that's not integrated or a version that's not been fully tested or has some incompatibility. And so these are to be expected. But I think that the products which deliver the most value to organizations are the ones which can hit the ground running the best. It's never going to be perfect, but if you can deliver value on day one and then build on top of that as you move down the line, as you tweak and enhance and, learn about the organization that this tool is now a part of, it's really the way to deliver that value. And I think that an organization that does that successfully can build a partnership and a relationship between the author of that software and the customer, such that it's beneficial to both sides of the party. We want to receive feedback to make the product better for all of our customers. Likewise, we want the feedback from all of our customers to benefit everybody that's bought that product in the past. And so it's about developing this relationship, it's about developing trust, and it's about delivering value.
I think I should flag, I have run into situations, now I'm not going to say where, but there was a company I worked for when I was consultant, and I remember there was a client where I was an expert on something. It was this product, and I don't remember the context as to why I wasn't included in this sales thing, but they ended up selling this product to this customer and then brought me in because they couldn't get it working. And I was like, this does not fit this purpose at all. This is not the right product. And it was at deployment, so I had to make it work. So I'm not saying all sales teams are like that, to be clear. And I liked working at that company. But I think in a consulting role, I often was expected to be an expert on a variety of things. And sometimes I was expected to become an expert overnight. So sometimes when you're doing the sales, maybe you're not fully aware on the technical granular level to the same extent that the client expects it as well. So I think there's many layers. I think overall, if you want the best solution for your environment, you need to understand your requirements well, and you have to have the right people in the conversation, even if that right person is junior.
At this juncture, I think it is important that the spotlight not be exclusively on the product as a source of headaches for senior management. It is not just about tuning the tool to fit the environment, is it? There's also the idea that a company should know a few things about itself in order to ensure the technology is a good fit. Mm-hmm. Zoe, what are the most common blind spots within organizations that become barriers to effective deployment of that very technology they're investing in?
I think from what I've seen in incidents that I've been called in at different organizations, it's often a lack of knowing what their environment looks like. If you don't have a configuration management database, for example, you don't know what solutions are in your environment. How are you going to protect them? I know that single sign-on is more common now than it was when I first started. And it does help drastically if you've got single sign-on because you've got this application connected. But you can still have other applications, other hardware, other development environments, for example, that there's no logs coming into SecOps. So to SecOps, it doesn't exist. But there's still some sort of connection. There's some sort of, our data's there somewhere. If that has an incident, we have no visibility. The log rotation on a local system is going to be a lot faster, whereas our retention period in our SOC is going to be up to the standard we require. By the time we hear about it, those logs might be lost or might never have existed in the first place. So what are the most common blind spots? Well, organizations knowing what's going on in their organization, especially organizations that are big, are complex, or look at organizations that grow really quickly. We grew naturally is a nightmare when it comes to security. I don't like that phrase. I mean, I'm happy for them in their business, but I'm not happy in the sense that I highly suspect controls are not well done. Visibility is not there. Awareness is probably not there as well. So there's common failures is visibility in the sense of knowing what's in their environment, what type of logs they have, what they can integrate, what they can't, those sort of things.
Chris, same question. What sort of blind spots are you observing?
When Zoe was speaking, it brought me back to an engagement we did many, many years ago. We had to do a security audit for an organization, and they were looking at kind of upgrading their hardware security modules in this case. And one of the first questions you ask them when somebody's thinking to do that is, what have you got today? What does your environment look like? And they all kind of looked at each other and scratched their heads a little bit and kind of came to the conclusion that they didn't really know. And so the first step of our involvement with them was an audit. And this audit wasn't deploying a tool and scanning. This audit was quite literally a guy with a clipboard walking around the data center, looking in the racks for something that looked like an HSM. And then when they found one, writing it down, looking at what it was plugged into and trying to find out what used it. And that was, even back then, it was scary. But, you kind of morph that today into organizations that make use of hybrid models of cloud because it's perhaps easier to scan than it used to be. And certainly you're not going to start walking around cloud service providers to find out what equipment's in use. But I remember a customer fairly recently who made use of a hybrid model. So they had data that was on-prem, they had data that was in the cloud. They were a global customer, and so they were making use of these cloud service providers and the availability around the world. And they absolutely thought that they had full visibility of their sensitive data. And they rolled out a data security posture management tool, which is many things, but fundamentally it's about discovery and it's about classification of data. They're kind of key elements of that. And they discovered whole sets of data which were sitting in SaaS applications, which were in cloud stores, which they'd either forgotten about, which is scary, or they didn't know about, which is more likely. Developers fire up applications as they try something. It can leave data. These small trials grow into larger and slightly more permanent fixtures within an organization. That's kind of what DevSecOps does for us. And I don't think that the visibility that Zoe talked about has really kept pace with that decentralization that many organizations are needing to pursue to conduct their business. And so you can look at some fairly scary statistics. We have at Thales the Data Threat Report. The 2026 edition was released fairly recently. And we've been doing that for, I can't remember how long, but at least 7 years, because I know since 2020, one of the things that we ask about is how much of your sensitive data is encrypted. And for 7 years, that's been somewhere around half of it. And people know this and they admit it, but it's how they go about fixing it, whether that ever bubbles up to the top of their list of things to deal with. And so, I think that organizations in many cases don't have the data about their environment. They find it hard to fully articulate exactly where their information is, where their services are, what they've got today, with any sense of, authority. And of course, it changes on a day-to-day basis.
It is amazing, isn't it? The stats in the Data Threat Report, and other industry reports for that matter, are just shocking when they reveal just how many organizations don't know where their data is. This is not just data in transit, like on the cloud somewhere or on the way to the cloud. It also brings to mind the whole idea of legacy technology, like servers in back rooms that no one has used for a few years, ports left open on old devices, or employees who've left the company, but their credentials still work. These are all elements of an organization that doesn't have a tight grip on its data and consequently in its security.
I've known situations where customers had a major incident because they lost some data that was stored on some server, but nobody knows where, and it ends up being like somebody's laptop that they just closed. Or it's a virtual machine that everybody thought was not required. They turned it off and realized it had half the HR data in it. It's interesting because I always talk about requirements from a security perspective because that's my area, but you have to look at all your requirements. Like when I'm choosing a solution, I'm looking at the technical requirements. I'm looking at the data privacy requirements as well, because obviously it's not my area, but still plays into it. And then I'm also looking at dashboarding, creating statistics and KPIs and measuring it and being able to report to senior leadership. It's not the sexiest part of security, but what I've noticed is if I don't have reporting on a tool, it probably isn't doing what I think it's doing.
I think you're right. It's not the sexiest part. But again, this is flying blind in the sense of forgetting what's out there. And you would think this would be an obligation of management to keep a close eye on these kinds of things. But now let's look at the other side and consider the overload and alert fatigue that people, employees, human beings are facing. We are being told constantly to be aware of phishing emails, social engineering, and other types of distraction crimes. And now AI seems to simply be adding to this pressure. So when we look at deploying new solutions and tuning them to the needs of the organization, people, too, need to be cared for and educated, since they are the ones in the front lines needing to get their work done and also to be able to use these security technologies essentially flawlessly. How can we factor either of these challenges, alert fatigue or AI-enhanced everything, into the blueprint of a well-tuned suite of security tools?
For sure, you need to make sure that you're using AI to cut noise and not to add it to your environment. It has to be there to help. You're absolutely right that AI is really good at making it easy for attackers to generate large volumes of now very convincing activity. Phishing's the obvious one. It used to be really easy. Look at the email. If it looks badly written, it's probably fraudulent. But now, of course, AI makes the emails perfect. It makes them personalized, and it can generate thousands of them in seconds. And so organizations aren't necessarily seeing more sophisticated attacks, but they're certainly seeing more volume and more variation. Rather than that same email to 1,000 people in the organization, you get 1,000 different emails customized to those individuals, looking to attack them in a way which is going to be most meaningful to them. And so I think that where AI can help is definitely in consolidating some of those alerts, in providing context, in grouping them together, in helping to prioritize them. So instead of the analyst needing to look at 100 separate alerts for 100 separate phishing attempts, it can group them into a single incident which can be addressed in perhaps the same way. But absolutely, you've got a battle on both sides of the fence there, with AI making it both easier to attack and potentially easier to protect, although that comes with a few caveats.
From an analyst perspective, that goes back to the tuning question. If you're getting too much noise, your tools are not effective in the way they need to be. So if the tool has AI, understand how it works, because you need to understand your requirements. You need to understand how it functions, how it learns, how it can unlearn in some situations, when you can stop it from learning, because maybe there's certain actions that happen in a period that aren't repeatable or something. But You need to understand it. You cannot deploy something as a black box and then just hope it's going to work, especially when it comes to security. If you ever read the book Hello World from Hannah Fry, she's brilliant and it's a lovely book. I highly recommend it. But one thing I loved about that book is in one of the chapters, she talks about autonomous cars and how when they were training this car, they didn't know how it was learning, but it was learning to drive on a road. And it was learning really well. It was doing great. And then they asked it to go over a bridge and it drove into the water. And they said, well, why did it drive into the water if it drives on the road everywhere else? Because the car was learning that a road has grass on both sides. And so grass on both sides is a river in the middle. And so you need to understand what the tool is doing and how it's learning, essentially. Otherwise, you can be in a situation where it's flagging things inaccurately, or worst case scenario, it's taking true positives, malicious, and actually marking them as false positives. That would be massively concerning.
There seems to be lots of work ahead of us then to ensure that a new system fits into an organization in a practical and sustainable manner. And alongside this comes a responsibility to ensure that people maintaining it, as well as those who are relying on it, are not, as our episode suggests, flying blind. What observations would you like to offer as we close this episode up? Zoe?
I think from my perspective, it doesn't matter what role you're in, you need to look at your short-term and long-term goals. And short-term being, what are your immediate concerns, especially when it comes to security? Are you concerned that your visibility isn't there? Are you concerned that you're not seeing the right alerts? So establish those short-term goals, but don't forget your long-term goals, because we can do the quick wins, we can do the changes, but if we're constantly in the short-term area, we're just fighting fires.
And Chris?
Yeah, I think that there's very definitely an opportunity for vendors and customers to work more closely together, more collaboratively, to produce the best outcomes, which I think is what both sides want. Reducing complexity, I think, is really important and something that we see many organizations striving for. As the organization's grown, especially where it crosses the on-prem cloud boundary, they're deploying more and more tools to be able to have visibility and control of more and more environments. Whereas I think that organizations would benefit from tool consolidation where you can, so that you've got a single pane of glass, so that you've got one set of APIs, one set of rules, one set of policies that you can then apply to multiple clouds or multiple environments. A lot of the future risks that we're talking about are here today. Organizations need to consider AI. They need to consider the progression in quantum computing, because both of those risks threaten trust in data and security. And you need to strengthen that trust foundation, because trust is built on top of security.
Well, as is often the case, the answer is not as simple as unboxing this new tool. Not that it's overly complicated, but there are clearly layers: tools, environment, people, awareness, vision, communication, planning. The dangers of technical debt truly lie straight ahead for those who are unwilling to embrace the full context of new technology. But thankfully, there are experts like Zoë Rose of Canon and Chris Harris of Thales, whose advice and experience are clearly of enormous value. So Zoë, thank you so much for joining us today on the Thales Security Sessions podcast.
It was lovely to chat with you, and thanks for having me as well.
And Chris, thank you also for being here today.
Thanks. It was great to be here.
Remember, if you like what you hear, please be sure to subscribe and tell a friend or a colleague or a client or your favorite AI agent, or all of them, about the Thales Security Sessions podcast. We will be back again soon with another episode and another discussion on the topics that you need to know about to successfully carry on in the business of information security. Until then, I'm Steve Prentice. Thanks for listening.